The lock has to be set before any of the fittings through the center part of the gun can be completed. The lock is inlet very carefully so that as much wood as possible is left for strength. Only enough wood is removed to allow the parts to work. The gun is weakest at this point, so any wood left makes the area stronger. The side plate, made of sheet brass, is mainly a washer for the two screws that hold the lock in place, but it's also a decorative piece. Designs on side plates vary from gun to gun, although generally they have a similar style. The side plate is inlet with lamp black, the same as the other parts. Afterward, it's filed off, smooth, and engraved. A round bottom chisel is used for cutting lobes and leaves. The majority of the engraving is done with the V-shaped engraver, which cuts a narrow line.
The lock fires when the sear is tripped. The sear is tripped by the trigger. So Mr. Gustler makes a trigger, and as he is making a finer than ordinary rifle, he makes a finer than ordinary trigger. The trigger is fitted into the stock in the right position relative to the lock and held in place with an iron pin.
The trigger plate protects the wood around the trigger. Since the recoil from firing the gun is taken by the wood around the tang screw goes through the stock and threads into the trigger plate to strengthen this section. Another screw goes from the back of the trigger plate to the thumb plate behind the tang to further strengthen this area. Once all these pieces are fitted, the woodwork here can be finished. Since this part of the rifle is heaviest looking, we take good care in shaping to give it as graceful an appearance as possible. A molding is cut along the forestock for the same reason.
The trigger guard, of course, protects the trigger and prevents the gun from being fired accidentally, but it does more than that. The long grip rail makes shooting the gun more comfortable by providing a place for the other fingers to rest. At the same time, the flowing lines make the gun more graceful in this critical area.
The front of the trigger guard is held in place with a pin, the rear with a wood screw. Only the extensions are filed before it's put on. After the trigger guard is inlet, the middle section is then filed. It's much easier to file once it's on the gun than when it's in the vise. The facets and molding on the trigger guard vary from gun to gun, although they all start from the same basic casting.
Once the fore end of the stock is finished, the gunsmith can attach the barrel. To do this, he first cuts 4 dovetails in the bottom flat of the barrel, and then from brass he folds up fittings called loops to fit into the dovetails.
Loops and pins are the most common method of holding in rifle barrels. Some gunsmiths like to use flat wedges instead of pins. Sometimes military weapons, especially French muskets, will have bands going all the way around the barrel and the stock. And these are not as nice looking. After the loops are fit, they are inlet into the stock. A hole is drilled through the woodwork into the cavity where the loops fit. Then a hole is drilled through the brass loop. The barrel is put back in place and the hole continued on through the stock. A pin is then driven through this hole to hold the barrel and stock. 4 pins hold the barrel and stock together.
The flintlock rifle was not invented in America. Though a distinctively American style did develop, it was for the most part an amalgam of English and German designs. However, one improvement that was purely American was the hinged metal lid of the brass box, or patch box, as it is called today. It was used to hold the patches, which are pieces of linen wrapped around the ball in loading to provide a gas seal and to seat the ball tightly in the barrel. The making of a brass box begins with the cover and finial, which are hinged together.
Fitting the hinge is the most irritating part of making the patch box. The hinge is curved to conform with the stock. This makes it hard to get the pin to go through. Once the pin is through, it's pretty hard to get the hinge to work because of the curve. After the hinge is made, the finial is filed out and inlet into the stock. The cavity is hollowed out by drilling a series of holes with a brace and bit. These are squared out with wood chisels. After hollowing out, the side plates are made. These have no function. They are strictly decorative. With all these inlet, the patch box is then filed to the contour of the stock. The engraving of the patch box varies as do all other engravings. I never make 2 the same. The spring that kicks the door open is placed under the finial. The spring that holds the door closed is set into the butt of the stock. The release is hidden as a screw in the toe of the stock. These releases are likely to be hidden